In Jewish tradition, we don't throw out holy books that get ripped. We bury them. And therefore, usually every year around this time of the year, before Passover, we make a big cleaning. And I take a bunch of boxes of books and holy things that have been ripped, and I bring them to the cemetery. And JCAM, the organization, buries it, and we pay them, and that's where it ends. So today in the morning, I went to West Roxbury to Pride of Jacob Cemetery, which is off Washington Street on Grove Street. And I dropped off the books. And then as I was leaving, I was chatting with the man in charge of JCAM. And he says, I was asking him about the cemetery. He said, I'll share with you something interesting. And he took me to a little marker, a little tombstone of a man, Dewey Stone. But before we get there, I want to tell you something about Pesach, and then I want to tell you a little bit about Dewey Stone. This Shabbat is called Shabbat HaGadol. It's the Great Shabbos. What does the Great Shabbos mean? The rabbis tell us that a great miracle happened on the 10th of Nisan, which we celebrate this Shabbos. What was the miracle? God told the Jewish people to take a sheep and tie it to their bedpost. And when the Egyptians asked them what it was, you see, the sheep was a deity of the Egyptians, and they were saying, "What are you tying it to the bedpost?" And said, "Oh, because God's going to take us out of Egypt, and we're going to bring it as a sacrifice." And the question, of course, is, why is that a great miracle? I mean, there were 10 plagues, much greater miracles. Why is that considered a great miracle? And the rabbis answer something very moving and powerful. They say, you see, the other miracles, God did the miracles. It was all made by God, from the splitting of the sea, to blood, to the death of the firstborn. But here, when it came to taking the sheep and tying it to their bedpost and having the courage to stand up to the Egyptians and their deity and say, this is what God will take us out of Egypt, and we will bring this as a sacrifice, took tremendous courage. But more importantly, it was a miracle created by man. The courage of the Jewish men and women to do this. And that's why we celebrate it as the Shabbat HaGadol, the great miracle. Because when us, women and men, do miracles, God cherishes it. And that's what brings upon even greater miracles from the Almighty. So now back to Dewey Stone. And that's what I thought about when I heard this story. So he takes me to this little marker, small marker, nothing wow. And he says, you know who this guy Dewey Stone was? I said, tell me. He says, well, Dewey Stone, he lived in Brockton, Massachusetts. And I hear, he says, that when he would walk into temple, literally, the cantor, the rabbi, everyone would stop out of respect to him till he went to his place. I said, what was so remarkable about him? And he tells me the story. You see, Dewey Stone became the president of Converse Company, which made rubbers and raincoats, rubber to cover your sneakers and raincoats, and eventually made the famous Chuck Taylor sneakers. And in 1940, he was at an event in Boston, and he heard President Weizmann speak back then, and he was really moved by him. And President Weizmann took him and a few other people back to his hotel room, and they stayed until the wee hours of the morning. The next day, he took him to Harvard to give a speech, and then to MIT. And he was really moved by him. And after the war, he helped in creating the State of Israel. Firstly, during the war, he literally bought boats that were used to smuggle Jews to Israel, which later became part of the early navy of the young State of Israel. The famous boat Exodus was owned by a company, Western Trading Company, which had one shareholder, which was Dewey Stone. And in fact, nobody knows this, but not only did he help to smuggle weapons to the state, but when he had to do his business, he knew that the FBI tapped his phone in his office and his house. So he would go to his sister's house, and his nephew speaks about how he would be doing homework upstairs, and meanwhile they were buying the Exodus ship, which famously had 4,500 people that were turned back to Germany. But then, another remarkable story said is that one day, Dewey Stone was being honored by B'nai B'rith of Boston, together with the national president of B'nai B'rith, which was Frank Goldman. Now, the day before, Weizmann was in New York, and Weizmann was very stressed because the State Department had convinced Harry Truman not to recognize the State of Israel. And Harry Truman was so convinced by that, he didn't even allow access to any Jews, Zionists, to come plead with him. So Weizmann tells this to Dewey, and Dewey's shooken by it because he realizes how important this is. I think it was May 12th, this meeting. And the next day, when he's at the dinner being honored, Frank Goldman says, you know, why don't I connect you? He says, why are you so distressed? And he tells him the story. He says, why don't I connect you to a guy I just met that's a Kansas City B'nai B'rith? And maybe I know he was in a company together with Harry Truman. And of course, the rest is history. He introduces him to Eddie Jacobson, who gets on a train and goes to Washington and convinces Harry Truman to allow Weizmann to come meet him only through the back door. And Weizmann was so powerful in his persuasion. And what he told Harry Truman, that Harry Truman made a full turn, 360 degree, and of course recognized the State of Israel. Not only that, but this man, Dewey Stone, years earlier, his family, Anastasio Somoza, was the dictator in Nicaragua, and he came in the 1930s to have eye surgery in Boston. And the family decided to make a big reception for him at their factory with trumpets and music and state police. And he was really touched by it because he felt he was being ignored by America. And they struck a friendship. And Dewey Stone and his brother convinced him to push Latin American countries to support Israel in the vote of independence. And the story goes on about this remarkable man who died without any children. Him and his wife were loved by their nephews and nieces, but he died without any children. He's buried in Pride of Jacob. And I went to say a prayer at this marker that's unremarkable in any other way, but the person who literally had one of the greatest impacts on the State of Israel. Why do I say this story? Because Dewey Stone was the story of the Jewish people and the sheep they put at their bed. Because the true miracles of the Jewish people are created by people, because God sends them as the messengers. And just as the Jewish men and women had the courage to bring the sheep and tie it to their bed, and therefore we celebrate this Shabbat, Shabbat HaGadol, so true Dewey Stone from 1940 had the courage to smuggle weapons and ships and people and help in the creation of the State of Israel. There was a remarkable documentary made about him. You could check him out. Think about today and all the Dewey Stones in the current conflict of Israel. All those people making miracles, creating miracles by the things they're inventing and creating, by the fights they're having, by the money they're raising, by the things they're doing to protect Israel. These are the Dewey Stones being created by today. These are the Jews who left Egypt, who had the courage, and why we celebrate Shabbat HaGadol. Because the greatest miracle the Jewish people have, the Nes Gadol that happened on Shabbat HaGadol, the great miracle, is that we create miracles through our efforts and through our unflinching faith in God and in the future of the Jewish people. It's that deep faith in Israel's right to exist and Israel's need to exist, and to the moral and ethical clarity of the Jewish people that allows us to create these miracles and to celebrate and create more Dewey Stones and more Shabbat HaGadols. Have a great